You know that moment when your entire world shifts in 30 seconds? When someone you trusted hurls their wedding ring at your chest and storms out like your marriage was just an obstacle in their evening
Winnie,
plans. That happened to me last Thursday night.
we
I
need
was
to
in the
have a
kitchen,
serious
stirring pasta,
conversation.
expecting a quiet evening, when Claire slammed the door open, her face flushed, jaw set. "We need to have a serious conversation," she said. In seconds, she tore off her jewelry, tossed it on the dresser, grabbed her purse, and declared, "I'm going out tonight. I'm not asking permission, I'm telling you." Then she did the unthinkable. She threw the ring at me, hard enough to feel it through my shirt. In that instant, I realized everything had changed. The life I knew, the marriage I thought was secure, vanished in the blink of an eye. You know that instant when your world flips? When someone you trusted for years decides that everything you shared means nothing, and suddenly nothing feels safe anymore? That happened to me last Thursday in our Capitol Hill apartment, stirring pasta and listening to a podcast, expecting a quiet evening with Claire, who would usually be home around 7 from her marketing job downtown. At 7:12, the door slammed, and she stormed in, briefcase dropping to the floor, face flushed, jaw tight, eyes sharper than I had ever seen before, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Hey," I said, "rough day?" No answer. She kicked off her heels, paced the bedroom, yanked off jewelry, and tossed it across the dresser like it carried all her frustration, and I followed, trying to keep calm. "We need to have a serious conversation," she said, cold and precise. "About what?" I asked, bracing myself. "I'm 27 and feel like I'm living a 40-year-old life. Every day is the same. Commute, office, repeat. I'm suffocating. My friends are living. I'm here playing house." I tried to rationalize, maybe work stress, birthday blues, or just a phase, but it was bigger than that. She was talking about our marriage, the confinement, the monotony, the loss of who she was before we became us. I told her she was loved, she was wanted. I valued her presence, not just the version of her that cooked and listened politely, but she dismissed that, saying she needed to be herself again, to feel spontaneous, alive, and seen outside the box of our life together. Then she did something I will never forget. She removed her wedding ring and threw it at me. Metal hit my chest hard, loud enough to echo in my head, a tangible declaration of rebellion, detachment, and cruelty, leaving me stunned, cold, and calculating. In that instant, I realized this wasn't a one-night rebellion. It was the culmination of weeks of testing boundaries, pushing limits, and building to this moment. And what I did next would define everything. I sat in my armchair for 2 hours, replaying every detail, reviewing her actions, her texts, her patterns, and I accessed the one card I had kept for emergencies: Jonathan Reeves, family law specialist, old college friend. Within moments, I documented every word, every photo, every text, preparing legally for the inevitable fallout, understanding that what she thought was temporary freedom would collide with consequences she could not reverse. I felt something clear and crystalline, not anger, not panic, but resolve. This wasn't about revenge, it was about structure, clarity, and protecting what was rightfully mine. I reflected on the past 4 years, the small missteps, the growing distance, the subtle erosion of trust, and I realized that the rules had changed. By morning, I would be holding the pen. By morning, everything she assumed she controlled would be documented, deliberate, and irrevocable, and nothing in our lives would ever feel the same again. Morning came with a quiet clarity that belied the chaos of the previous night. Claire's ring lay in my pocket like a symbol of broken trust, a tangible artifact of her decision to declare herself single while still married, and I moved deliberately, calm, knowing every step I took would matter. The first move was legal. Jonathan Reeves, the attorney I had kept on standby for emergencies, was contacted immediately. Within an hour, I had compiled every piece of evidence: photos, timestamps, text messages, call recordings, every detail of her nightclub escapade, cataloged, backed up, and ready to present. As I sat in my apartment, the city waking around me, I realized how precise one had to be when consequences were real. There would be no room for emotion-driven errors, no room for hesitation. Every message Claire had sent, every photo she had willingly shared became a bullet in the arsenal of law, a record of intent that no argument about one bad night could erase. I thought about her mindset, the thrill of independence, the desire to feel alive, the need to assert herself, and I allowed a fleeting empathy to surface, but I dismissed it quickly. Empathy would not undo the damage she had inflicted or protect what I had built. By 10:35 a.m., Jonathan and I were reviewing strategy, discussing the legal ramifications of abandonment, temporary orders, and asset protection. Every step was calculated. I realized that wealth of preparation and clarity of thought were now as much my tools as the law itself, a defense against impulsive chaos. Claire's defiance had created opportunity. By acting decisively, I could ensure that boundaries were respected, property protected, and that the lesson she was teaching herself about consequences would be unequivocal. I moved through the apartment deliberately, organizing her half of the belongings she had left behind, separating evidence from domestic items, documenting everything. My phone buzzed constantly, a stream of missed calls, texts, and voicemails from Claire, each one escalating in desperation, frustration, and confusion. I did not respond, allowing the legal process to mediate what words alone could not, knowing that silence now carried more weight than any argument. By the afternoon, I had initiated account separations, changed passwords, frozen joint accounts, and prepared the apartment for her eventual retrieval of remaining items, all while maintaining calm, collected, and precise, because chaos benefits the unprepared. As evening approached, I reflected on the psychological shift. The rules had changed overnight. Claire had assumed her rebellion would provoke anger or desperation. Instead, it had met methodical, unflinching clarity. Every call, every text, every frantic plea she made would be recorded and cataloged. This was not vindictive. This was tactical, a demonstration that choices have consequences, that actions, once committed, are not easily erased. And yet I understood that this clarity had its own cost: distance, emotional isolation, and the quiet recognition that the person I thought I knew was not the same, that trust, once fractured, leaves a permanent echo. The city lights outside the Capitol Hill apartment glimmered against my resolve. Claire believed she could teach a lesson in freedom. I had learned the depth of discipline and preparation. By the time night fell, I was ready. The petitions drafted, evidence secured, legal strategy outlined. Tomorrow, the game would move into the courtroom, and I would step forward calm, deliberate, and unshakable, proving that choices, even ones made in moments of impulsive rebellion, carry weight that cannot be ignored. And in the quiet after her chaos, I felt it clearly: control, clarity, and the satisfaction of knowing that when you act with precision, the world bends to the rules you set. The morning sun hit the courthouse steps as I approached, with Jonathan by my side, a folder of meticulously organized evidence under my arm. My heart beat steady despite the anticipation. Claire was already inside, flanked by her attorney, Jennifer Morrison, a woman whose sharp suit and sharper gaze suggested she thrived in adversarial moments. And for a fleeting second, I allowed myself to notice the contrast between my calm and her panic. The lobby was quiet, almost sterile, and the air carried the faint scent of polished wood and law books. I glanced at Claire, her makeup carefully applied, hair styled, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed the anxiety beneath her composure. Jonathan whispered a quick reminder of strategy as we walked in, and I nodded, placing the folder on my lap, thumb brushing over the evidence as if touching the facts themselves lent me control. The courtroom was formal, imposing, yet I felt grounded. This was procedural, tactical, and I had prepared for every angle. When the judge, Margaret Oster, called us forward, her gray hair and piercing eyes scanned the room, and the weight of the law felt immediate. Claire's attorney began, arguing that this was a case of marital miscommunication, that one regrettable evening shouldn't define 4 years, that reconciliation was possible. Jonathan countered with precision: evidence of deliberate abandonment, photographic proof, timestamps, explicit statements of her intention to declare herself single, all presented calmly, unemotionally, yet with undeniable clarity. Claire's eyes widened slightly at the photos, the texts, the recordings, the theatricality of her nightclub night laid bare, every detail catalogued, every action verifiable. She tried to explain herself, voice trembling, words spilling over in regret, but Jonathan's cross-examination revealed intent, showing that this wasn't an isolated lapse, but a conscious choice with consequences. I remained composed, occasionally glancing at her, feeling a cold clarity that this was not personal vengeance, but methodical protection of what was mine and an assertion that actions carry weight. The judge listened, silent yet attentive, and when she asked if reconciliation was desired, I responded simply, "No, Your Honor." Trust had been fractured. Consequences could not be undone. Claire's tears, her pleas, her attempts to soften the impact were visible, human, yet legally inconsequential. By the time the judge returned from recess, reviewing the evidence, it was clear. Voluntary abandonment was established. Orders were read, sole occupancy, no spousal maintenance, joint accounts frozen, property division structured, mediation scheduled. Claire's face fell, her earlier confidence replaced with disbelief. Outside the courtroom, Jonathan clapped my shoulder quietly, his approval measured, professional, reinforcing that the strategy had succeeded. The weight of months of observation, documentation, and preparation culminated in a moment that balanced justice with precision. I realized that calm preparation outmatched impulsive action, that consequences delivered with clarity were more effective than anger or argument. And yet, beneath the procedural victory, I allowed myself a brief reflection. Empathy for her humanity, recognition of our shared past, and the sober acknowledgement that this was not about cruelty, but about respecting boundaries and asserting control. The drive home was quiet, the city moving around me in its familiar rhythm, yet I felt the gravity of change, the certainty that boundaries had been reinforced, the rules of engagement rewritten. Claire's rebellion had met calculated order. Her impulsive night had collided with preparation, patience, and clarity. By the end of the day, the pieces were in place, the legal mechanisms activated, and the next phase, mediation, asset division, and the final reckoning, loomed ahead. I understood now that control, clarity, and preparedness were not just tactics, they were shields, lessons, and statements all at once, and the game had only just begun. The mediation room was neutral and quiet, the faint hum of fluorescent lights above and the scratch of pens on paper setting a subtle rhythm as we entered. Both attorneys, the mediator, Robert Walsh, and the two of us arranged around the long conference table. Jonathan beside me with a folder of meticulously organized documents, Claire flanked by Morrison, trying to mask the tension with practiced composure. Walsh began with procedural instructions, his deep breath echoing slightly as he scanned the room, gauging our intent, and for a fraction of a second I felt the weight of anticipation pressing on my shoulders, but I straightened, letting preparation and patience carry the room. Claire spoke first, her voice quivering despite its polished cadence, pleading for reconciliation, for understanding, for more time to save what can be saved, her hands twisting nervously in front of her, the subtle shuffle of her shoes on the carpet betraying the anxiety beneath her words. Morrison followed with arguments framed in fairness, referencing temporary maintenance, a share of apartment appreciation, and willingness to attend counseling, yet every point was layered with emotional leverage. Jonathan countered methodically, presenting documented evidence, the wedding ring thrown, nightclub photos with timestamps, explicit text declarations of being single, and deliberate abandonment. Claire's expression flickered as the truth of her actions confronted her, the faint click of her chair against the tile punctuating her hesitation, each piece of evidence acting as a mirror to her choices. Walsh probed for flexibility, suggested compromise, and sought to mediate, but my resolve remained steady. Boundaries had been crossed, and accountability had to be exact. Hours passed with careful negotiation, documents shuffled and signed, each motion reinforcing my command, accounts divided proportionally, assets itemized, temporary maintenance rejected, and final release agreements outlined. Each step reinforced lucidity, each signature cemented accountability. I observed Claire closely, her initial confidence waning, the subtle tightening of her jaw, the way her eyes flickered toward Jonathan and then away, realizing actions have consequences and spontaneity without foresight carries cost. The physicality of the room, the faint rustle of clothing, the shuffle of papers, the soft tap of a pen on the table contrasted sharply with the psychological intensity unfolding, and for brief moments I acknowledged a spark of tension in my chest, but it dissolved into quiet determination. As the final documents were signed, the room exhaled collectively, tension released, not in relief, but in resolution. Months of observation, preparation, and deliberate response distilled into clarity and precision. Walking out into the cool autumn air, the city moving around me, I realized control is not dominance but measured command, that boundaries require enforcement without anger, that foresight and meticulous preparation transform chaos into lucidity. Claire's attempts to negotiate emotionally against facts had been neutralized, her leverage gone, her lessons delivered late but unmistakably. By the time the door closed behind her, the stakes were defined, the path ahead clear. No ambiguity, no negotiation beyond this point, just life rebuilt on principle, foresight, and deliberate choice, with the quiet acknowledgement that preparation and precision win where impulsive emotion fails. The apartment was quiet now, almost alien in its stillness. The faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the wall clock filling spaces that had once held the chaos of shared life. I moved deliberately, taking inventory of what remained, noting the boxes already packed with Claire's belongings, the half-empty drawers, the items she had left behind, furniture I had chosen years before, photographs that captured happier, simpler times, and mementos that felt simultaneously heavy and irrelevant. Each step I took echoed softly against the hardwood floor, a reminder that the apartment now reflected one life, one vision, one set of choices firmly anchored in my control. I gathered the remaining paperwork, investment statements, and digital backups, aligning them neatly on the coffee table, the scratch of my pen marking minor notes of confirmation. The smell of teriyaki from takeout lingered faintly in the air, blending oddly with the sterile scent of cleaning supplies I'd used to reclaim the space. Small details, the way sunlight caught the edge of the kitchen counter, the subtle creak of the living room chair as I sat to sort, grounded me in reality amidst the intensity of recent events. Later, the doorbell chimed softly, and Kevin arrived, a witness and friend who understood the stakes, his presence reassuring yet sober. Claire followed minutes later, flanked by Melissa and, unexpectedly, by Bridget, each step deliberate, each glance measured, the faint rustle of shopping bags and clothing marking the rhythm of what was to come. She moved slowly through the apartment, inspecting boxes, lifting lids, her fingers brushing past items I had once thought mundane, but now seemed imbued with significance. She paused at the wedding album, her eyes welling, and whispered to Melissa, "He doesn't even want our wedding photos." I stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, noting the small shifts in her posture, the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her voice trembled yet tried to mask despair. Jewelry boxes were opened, earrings from anniversaries examined, mementos of birthdays and holidays picked up and replaced. "You're really okay with me taking all of this?" she asked finally. "It's yours," I replied evenly, voice calm but unyielding, every word reinforcing the boundaries that had been crossed and the lessons learned. She lingered in the doorway, one last glance over the space that had been ours, half-packed boxes lining the hallway, the apartment's air cleared both physically and symbolically. "For what it's worth, I really am sorry," she murmured. I acknowledged nothing beyond the facts. Apology cannot undo intentional action. Kevin watched quietly, a subtle nod of affirmation passing between us, the apartment now silent except for the faint ticking of time marking the passage of months condensed into hours of reckoning. Later, when the doors closed behind her and her entourage, I walked the apartment slowly, the sound of my footsteps the only reminder that life continues uninterrupted when clarity and accountability guide action. The city outside moved on, indifferent. Yet inside, the apartment reflected the hard-earned balance of control restored, boundaries reinforced, and the understanding that respect is earned through consistency, deliberate choice, and consequence. No impulsive reconciliation, no gestures of last-minute desperation, just measured command over my own life, the quiet satisfaction of foresight validated, and the knowledge that the next phase, legal resolution and emotional closure, would proceed unimpeded by chaos or distraction. By the early morning light, I had mapped every angle, every contingency. The documents sat neatly in a folder on the kitchen counter, each statement, screenshot, and timestamp a piece of the puzzle, a testament to deliberate preparation. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and faintly of last night's takeout, the hum of the refrigerator now a quiet background pulse to the intensity of thought. I dressed deliberately, a crisp shirt and slacks, shoes tapping lightly on the hardwood as I rehearsed conversations, mental notes of phrasing, timing, and posture, the chessboard of legal strategy spread before me in real time. At 8 a.m., Jonathan met me in the Columbia Center conference room, his presence calm but assertive, a professional anchor in the storm of emotion I had cataloged meticulously. We reviewed evidence again. Texts where Claire declared herself single, photos of her in neon-lit booths, receipts, call recordings, and account records, each annotated, backed up, and cross-referenced. "Everything is here," I said quietly, my voice steady though my chest bore the residual tension of the past nights. Jonathan nodded, thumbs tapping lightly on the table, eyes scanning for gaps or vulnerabilities. None appeared. By 9:15, we were en route to King County Courthouse, the city streets humming beneath the tires, sunlight cutting sharp angles through the buildings, every step a measure of control, every breath a reaffirmation of calculated clarity. Claire was already waiting, composed now, professional attire, hair and makeup carefully arranged as if to convey control she had surrendered the night before. Her attorney, sharp and assertive, moved with practiced confidence, yet the subtle twitch in Claire's eyes betrayed uncertainty, a hesitation masked by rehearsed words. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and institutional order, the judge's gavel waiting to punctuate the legal rhythm. Security scanners and echoes in the halls reminded me how formal, how precise, how unforgiving the arena was. Jonathan presented the evidence methodically, each photo, text, and recording a carefully placed move, illustrating voluntary abandonment, deliberate intent, and documented conduct. Claire's attorney argued for reconciliation, appealing to emotion, suggesting temporary discord and a willingness to repair, but I remained measured, calm, silent witness to her case collapsing under facts. I felt the weight of the room, the gaze of the judge flickering briefly between us, noting body language, subtle shifts in posture, micro-expressions that betrayed intent. My hands rested lightly on the folder, nothing trembled. My voice, when it came, was calm and precise, every word deliberate. No desire for reconciliation. Declaration of abandonment stands. Documentation is complete. Silence filled the courtroom, punctuated only by the subtle rustle of papers and the scratch of pen on notepad. Claire's lips pressed tightly, eyes avoiding mine, a brief flash of frustration betraying the veneer of composure. The judge nodded, weighing evidence and testimony, a pause stretching as tension coiled like a spring ready to release. I felt a fraction of doubt, only enough to sharpen focus, nothing more. Orders were read. Temporary possession, division of joint accounts, no spousal maintenance, mandatory mediation scheduled, all procedural precision reinforcing consequence, accountability, and command. Outside, Jonathan clapped my shoulder softly, acknowledgement without fanfare. Claire exited, escorted by her attorney, a mixture of resignation and disbelief marking her expression, her steps measured but hesitant. I walked out separately, the city air crisp, apartment waiting as a sanctuary reclaimed, and a mental note etched in clarity. Preparation wins where impulse fails, and the rules of engagement are defined by foresight, not emotion. The mediation room was neutral, sterile but charged, sunlight filtering through blinds in thin, deliberate lines across the polished table where we sat. Each paper, folder, and tablet arranged with precision, a visual testament to preparation and control. Robert Walsh, the mediator, a man in his 50s with an air of patient authority, outlined the rules, his voice calm yet commanding, setting the rhythm for a game where emotion would be tested against logic. Claire sat opposite me, her posture rigid, eyes red-rimmed but glossy with unshed tears, her attorney whispering strategies, notes passing back and forth like a secret code, while I remained silent, observing, cataloging every gesture, every micro-expression, every subtle tremor of finger or lip, a mental database of intent and desperation. Jonathan guided me quietly, a reassuring presence, signaling when to speak, when to let the weight of silence do its work, when to present evidence without drama, letting facts dominate the emotional fog. Claire's voice trembled at first, a plea for reconciliation, suggesting counseling, temporary allowances, any pathway to undo the legal moves she had triggered. I remained calm, acknowledging her words with minimal reaction, letting the air of measured detachment emphasize consequence over emotion. The discussion shifted to property, the apartment, joint accounts, retirement contributions, jewelry, and shared possessions, each item a battlefield, each number a test of precision, documentation reinforcing authority and accountability. Claire's attorney argued points of fairness, seeking to tilt perception of value, but Jonathan countered methodically, presenting exact contributions, timestamps, and supporting evidence that left no room for conjecture or emotional sway. Claire's face grew pale, the cracks of frustration appearing around her eyes and jawline, subtle sighs, soft slumping of shoulders betraying the stress of being measured against irrefutable fact. I noticed the soft shuffle of papers, the scratch of pen on note sheets, the faint hum of the air conditioning, tiny details grounding me, reinforcing the contrast between calculated composure and her growing emotional volatility. Hours passed, the room a stage where patience, restraint, and preparation won over passion, the mediator intervening occasionally, measuring responses, noting points of conflict, yet the narrative remained ours, scripted by prior planning, not impulse. When monetary settlements were discussed, Claire's pleas for inflated shares were met with calm, unyielding precision, a final offer laid on the table, demonstrating goodwill but bounded by documented reality. Her face registered shock, a soft intake of breath, her hands clenching and unclenching, a subtle tremor in her voice, and yet no words could undo what had been set into motion. By the end, documents were signed, agreements finalized, the room heavy with the weight of inevitability. Claire's tears now quieter, more resigned than rebellious, the last line of defense fading as she realized the rules had shifted entirely. The strategic play had been won through preparation, clarity, and unyielding command of facts, leaving her with a stark lesson. Impulsive rebellion may feel powerful in the moment, but meticulous strategy defines long-term consequence. Exiting the room, I felt the subtle release of tension, the city air outside crisp and real, a sense of calm authority settling over me, the apartment, my finances, my life carefully protected, and Claire finally confronting the consequences of her choices, a vivid reminder that preparation and measured action always outperform chaos and impulse. The apartment was quiet now, a hushed space that felt foreign yet familiar, sunlight slicing across the hardwood floors, reflecting off surfaces once crowded with shared memories, now eerily sparse, half-empty drawers and neatly stacked boxes signaling the finality of months of conflict distilled into a few tangible movements. Claire's belongings were organized meticulously near the door, each item accounted for, a visual ledger of both her presence and absence, while I moved calmly through the space, methodical, cataloging, checking each room, each closet, each cabinet, every trace of her life that intersected with mine, feeling the weight of history in the empty frames, the countertops cleared of clutter, the faint scent of her perfume lingering as an echo of days gone by. I heard her approach, footfalls tentative yet purposeful, accompanied by her sister and unexpectedly by Bridget, a silent witness to what had been negotiated, what had been claimed and relinquished. Claire's eyes flicked toward me, a mixture of sorrow, frustration, and the sharp sting of reality dawning, her hands trembling as she picked through the boxes, lingering on items of sentimental value, the wedding album, the jewelry from anniversaries, the small mementos she had once loved, each touch a quiet testimony to memories now being reconciled with loss, while I observed without interruption, maintaining composure, letting the weight of consequence settle naturally, acknowledging no words could undo the path she had chosen. She spoke softly, questions about fairness, remnants of confrontation softened by the recognition of inevitability, and I responded with measured calm. "It's all yours. Take what matters to you. The rest remains." Her tears fell silently, the edges of her lips trembling, voice catching, but no argument remained potent enough to alter the course. The apartment itself seemed to breathe differently, larger, liberated from tension, as if the walls themselves recognized the end of a chapter. We moved through the final motions, keys exchanged, a last look around the apartment, the soft click of the front door as it closed behind her, a sound that echoed louder than any argument, a punctuation mark on 4 years of shared life. The smart lock was reprogrammed, codes changed, access revoked, a practical but symbolic gesture, asserting order and ownership, while I walked slowly through the apartment, absorbing the silence, the faint hum of electronics, the subtle creak of the floor beneath my feet, a meditative rhythm, each step reinforcing the clarity of my choices, the command over my environment, and the psychological closure that had been meticulously earned. I sat at the kitchen counter, ordered takeout for one, and for the first time in months allowed myself to exhale, the weight of uncertainty replaced by a calm, resolute clarity. The apartment, once a shared battlefield of emotion and conflict, now felt like a sanctuary, a reflection of discipline, preparation, and the consequences of deliberate choices. The quiet punctuated only by the digital hum of notifications and the distant city sounds, reminders of life continuing outside these walls. In this space, I understood the stark lesson. Chaos and impulsivity may provoke a momentary stir, but steady strategy, documentation, and unshakable composure define long-term outcomes. Claire's departure, though painful in memory, crystallized the truth of respect, boundaries, and self-preservation, leaving me free to rebuild, to breathe, to reclaim the rhythm of my life without disruption, knowing that the finality of actions, when paired with clarity and resolve, brings a peace that no apology or plea can recreate. The apartment now stood as testament not to loss, but to careful stewardship of consequence and the quiet triumph of measured patience over fleeting rebellion. The first days after Claire's departure were quiet but heavy, a strange combination of emptiness and relief settling over the apartment, the spaces that once felt cramped with tension now open, light spilling across the countertops and floors, revealing surfaces that hadn't been seen in months, the smell of coffee brewing alone in the morning, the distant hum of traffic outside, each sound and sensation grounding me in the present as I moved deliberately through routines once shared but now fully my own. I started small, making breakfast exactly how I liked it, choosing music for myself rather than a compromise, reading the newspaper aloud in the living room without interruption, noticing the subtle comfort in a space no longer filled with conflict, the apartment finally breathing in time with my own rhythm. Work became a refuge, an ordered universe where logic reigned and emotional unpredictability was absent, and I dove into architecture designs, code reviews, and project planning with precision, letting focus sharpen where chaos had once blurred the edges of thought. Every completed task a reminder that control and clarity could be reclaimed, even when life outside the office was unsettled. Weekends were slower, quieter, grocery runs, gym sessions, and the occasional coffee at the park. Small acts that had once seemed mundane now carried weight, reminders of independence and self-reliance, a gentle restoration of identity. Friends reached out, curious, concerned. I shared carefully, the narrative simplified, omitting drama but maintaining the essential truth. Boundaries had been drawn, consequences executed, and now life moved forward. Texts and calls were minimized, notifications silenced, digital order mirrored physical and emotional order, every password, account, and file meticulously reviewed, organized, and secured, a tangible manifestation of regained control. Reflection became habitual, sitting at the window in the evening, watching sunlight fade, tracing memories of the last weeks, parsing lessons learned. Respect is not optional. Emotional impulsivity has consequences, and self-preservation requires deliberate action and unwavering clarity. Each memory of Claire, her laughter, her defiance, her fleeting remorse, was cataloged not with bitterness, but with sober acknowledgement. Actions define character, and intent shapes outcomes. Nothing in the past could be undone, but the present could be orchestrated with precision, a space for thought, planning, and measured living. Slowly, curiosity began to reemerge, a desire to explore not just the city, but new experiences, to reclaim spontaneity on my terms, without interference or manipulation, aware that freedom is earned through careful attention to choices and consequences. Financial affairs, long entangled, were now simplified, organized, and fully under my control, a concrete reminder that preparation and discipline translate into tangible independence. The apartment, fully in my name, served as both fortress and sanctuary, the rooms echoing with silence that no longer felt like absence but opportunity, each corner a testament to boundaries respected and lessons internalized. Nights became meditative, walking through the empty living room, feeling the faint vibrations of the city below, sipping tea, reflecting on the clarity gained through upheaval, the unexpected comfort in solitude, the quiet triumph in knowing that when chaos meets preparation, the outcome is never random, and every decision, from minor to monumental, carries weight that shapes the trajectory of life. By midweek, routine solidified. Confidence returned not with arrogance, but with calm certainty, a sense of mastery over environment, emotion, and future actions. The quiet victories of post-separation life weaving together a new foundation on which to build, one of patience, clarity, and the quiet power of self-respect. Life after Claire had settled into a rhythm, but the silence was no longer merely absence, it was invitation, a space where curiosity and cautious excitement mingled with lingering vigilance, a chance to reclaim the parts of myself I had long deferred. I started small, meeting friends for casual drinks at familiar spots, observing the subtle social dynamics that had once felt alien, noticing how much attention I had unconsciously paid to another's preferences, now free to choose my own, from the music that played to the pace of conversation, the timing of laughter, the selection of dishes and drinks without compromise, each small choice reinforcing autonomy and reminding me of what it felt like to navigate the world on my own terms. Conversations carried a new weight. Without the ever-present lens of marital obligation, I could speak, listen, and respond without filtering or deflection, noticing nuances in tone, humor, and gesture that had previously blurred under stress. The subtle flinch when someone's comment touched on vulnerability now met with deliberate calm rather than defensive reflex. Tentative steps into dating began, not as a rebellion, but as exploration, a measured curiosity to test what it meant to connect without expectation, to observe chemistry and compatibility, to savor the thrill of shared laughter and the intrigue of first impressions, each encounter a microcosm of independence, freedom, and self-discovery, all while maintaining boundaries that were previously undefined. Every text, call, and meeting considered through the lens of personal integrity and emotional clarity. The digital realm, once a source of anxiety, became a tool for selective engagement. Curated profiles, thoughtful messages, and intentional matches, a controlled space where exploration did not equate to recklessness, where curiosity could thrive alongside caution. Weekends became experiments in spontaneity, solo trips to galleries, hikes in the Cascades, and occasional concerts where I immersed myself fully in the sensory world without negotiation, absorbing the sights, sounds, and smells that had been muted under years of compromise. The faint scent of pine in the air, the crisp crunch of gravel beneath shoes, the rhythm of drums echoing through the concert hall, each stimulus reinforcing a world reclaimed and self-directed. Evenings were punctuated with reflection, journaling small victories and observations, noting emotional reactions to interactions, cataloging growth and resilience, assessing patterns of trust and intuition, the faint scratch of pen on paper grounding thought in tangible action, a methodical rehearsal of lessons learned, a continuous calibration of judgment and desire, the mind sharpening as the body settled into comfort with solitude and selective company. Friends' curiosity about my single status sparked conversations layered with humor, subtle tension, and the occasional awkward acknowledgement of past turmoil, each exchange a reminder of social navigation as a skill, one I had nearly forgotten, now being reactivated with deliberate care. Through these experiences, I began noticing an emergent confidence, tempered not with arrogance, but with lucidity, the quiet recognition that freedom is earned not by absence alone, but by careful attention to choices, the integrity of actions, and respect for self and others. The world was no longer a stage for compromise or emotional manipulation. It was a laboratory for measured exploration, where every encounter, every laugh, every connection was an experiment in reclaiming life fully, responsibly, and deliberately. By the end of these weeks, I realized that independence was not a temporary state, but a foundation, a structure to rebuild relationships, ambitions, and identity, fortified by reflection, careful engagement, and the discipline of deliberate choice, the narrative of my life now entirely in my own hands. Weeks passed, and with each morning I woke to an apartment that felt fully mine. The absence of Claire transforming not into emptiness, but into space. Space to think, move, and breathe on my own terms. A quiet affirmation of control and accountability. I found myself lingering over coffee at the kitchen counter, savoring the aroma and warmth without negotiation, observing the sunlight shifting across the room, the faint hum of the city below, and the subtle creak of the floorboards underfoot. Moments that had previously gone unnoticed, now anchors of presence and autonomy. A quiet meditation on how much life can be reclaimed simply by removing interference, by standing alone and acknowledging the weight and the freedom of being entirely responsible for one's choices. At work, the difference was palpable. Emails and code reviews no longer competed with mental distraction. Focus sharpened into a precise, almost surgical attention. Each decision measured, deliberate, and fully mine. Meetings flowed smoothly, ideas crystallized clearly, and colleagues began noticing a new ease and authority in my interactions, a quiet confidence that was no longer performative, but deeply rooted in competence, preparation, and self-possession. Opportunities arose that previously would have been overlooked, projects that required initiative and leadership, responsibilities that demanded judgment and creativity. I approached each with the calm efficiency of someone who had already endured chaos and emerged with clarity, observing the subtle dynamics of teamwork, influence, and professional negotiation with an analytical eye, the satisfaction of results amplified by the knowledge that my focus and effort were unmediated, undiluted by compromise or distraction. Even outside work, the psychological shift manifested in small but undeniable ways. Walks through Volunteer Park became deliberate explorations of thought, moments of mindfulness in movement and observation, noticing the cool brush of wind against skin, the texture of bark, the distant chatter of families and joggers, each sensory input reinforcing a sense of grounded presence and control, a reminder that autonomy is not merely legal or financial, but profoundly psychological, a reclamation of mental and emotional territory that had been ceded over years of marital negotiation. Socially, confidence radiated subtly. Friends remarked on a new energy, a quiet authority in conversation, a willingness to speak and listen without hesitation, without the undercurrent of second-guessing or appeasement that had once defined my interactions. Dating remained cautious but informed, measured by curiosity and boundaries rather than desire or desperation, each encounter reinforcing lessons in discernment, trust, and emotional clarity. Financially, reviewing investments, tracking savings, and planning for future expenditures became exercises in strategy, a reflection of both competence and independence, the satisfaction of knowing that each dollar, each decision rested entirely in my hands, unmediated, accounted for, and intentional. By the time the leaves began turning amber, I realized that confidence had become habitual, a subtle, persistent force that informed every action, interaction, and reflection, a steady current of self-assurance born from deliberate preparation, psychological awareness, and measured independence. I had emerged not only from a marriage ended, but from a version of myself previously obscured, a version capable of facing chaos with clarity, making choices without compromise, and moving forward with precision and presence, the narrative of my life now fully authored by me, the past no longer a shadow, but a foundation, the future entirely my own. The quiet of the apartment, once a sanctuary of regained control, now became a laboratory for self-exploration. Each decision and interaction a subtle experiment in autonomy and identity. I discovered that freedom was not simply the absence of conflict, but the active engagement with choice, the deliberate shaping of days according to preference rather than obligation, the small luxuries of waking without expectation, eating what I wanted, playing music at a volume that pleased me, opening windows wide to the city air without compromise, moments that seemed trivial yet accumulated into a profound sense of command over my own life, a psychological recalibration after years of unconscious concession. Socially, boundaries became a new arena of discovery, meeting friends for drinks, reconnecting with old colleagues, or attending industry mixers. I realized how often I had muted myself, anticipating others' moods, preferences, or judgments. Now, I could speak freely, choose where to invest attention, and observe the effects of presence unfiltered. Each conversation a micro-assessment of compatibility, energy, and alignment, teaching lessons in discernment that were impossible to internalize during marital compromise. The world of dating, cautiously re-entered, presented both temptation and insight. Casual encounters were no longer distractions or obligations, but deliberate tests of patience, communication, and self-awareness. I could gauge interest without desperation, evaluate intention without fear, and maintain equilibrium even when desire or ego was engaged, understanding that attraction was not a transaction, but a dialogue, a reflection of mutual resonance and personal clarity, a lesson in emotional economy that married life had obscured. Professional ambition, too, took on new layers. Projects that once seemed routine now demanded creative risk-taking and strategic initiative, and I approached them with the psychological freedom to innovate, propose bold solutions, and accept accountability without seeking external validation, enjoying the subtle exhilaration of competence deployed independently, the satisfaction amplified by awareness that outcomes reflected skill, judgment, and deliberate preparation rather than circumstance or codependence. Financially, I experimented cautiously. Investments, travel planning, and lifestyle decisions became exercises in both prudence and indulgence, balancing risk with reward, enjoying the autonomy to say yes to opportunities I had deferred or ignored, each choice reinforcing not only financial literacy, but the self-assured mindset of someone navigating life with authority and intention. Even solitude became an active practice. Long walks, early morning runs, or hours with a book were reframed as deliberate engagement with the world rather than passive absence, moments to reflect, recalibrate, and enjoy the elasticity of time without pressure, cultivating a psychological resilience that felt both liberating and stabilizing. Yet subtle challenges arose. Old habits of anticipation and concession surfaced in fleeting discomfort or doubt, reminders of the years spent moderating behavior for another's comfort. When these moments occurred, I observed without judgment, adjusted without friction, and allowed them to pass, each test reinforcing autonomy and emotional clarity, proving that freedom was not an absence of challenge, but a measured confrontation with self and circumstance. By the month's end, I recognized a deep transformation. Freedom was no longer an abstract concept or legal status. It was a living practice, an active engagement with choice, responsibility, and presence, a recalibration of values and desires, a conscious affirmation of self, and the subtle understanding that life, when directed deliberately, could feel expansive, balanced, and deeply satisfying. The narrative of autonomy unfolding one intentional decision at a time. The initial serenity of solo life was disrupted sooner than I expected, proving that freedom carried responsibilities I hadn't fully anticipated, a fact that arrived subtly but unmistakably in the form of colleagues, acquaintances, and casual encounters testing the limits of my patience, ethics, and self-control. An urgent project at work demanded late nights, early mornings, and rapid coordination, pushing me to deploy both skill and diplomacy without the buffer of marital compromise. Each decision a reminder that independence was exhilarating but exacting, that the absence of another's expectations did not eliminate accountability, it amplified it. Then came personal interactions that mirrored the complexities of my former marriage, though now stripped of codependency. Friends and acquaintances offered advice unsolicited, some with genuine concern, others with thinly veiled judgments about my dating life, my singlehood, or my supposed overreaction to the breakup, and I learned to navigate these interventions with calm assertiveness, practicing verbal precision, selective disclosure, and measured empathy, realizing that emotional discipline was as critical in the social sphere as it had been in the legal arena. A surprising challenge arrived in the form of Claire's social circle, friends reaching out indirectly, checking in under the guise of casual concern, and even Bridget attempting subtle manipulation, reminders of the entanglements left behind. Each encounter required vigilance, a careful calibration of response and restraint, weighing transparency against strategic silence, engagement against disengagement, a psychological balancing act that tested the limits of my focus and reinforced the value of deliberate action over impulsive reaction. Financial and logistical trials emerged simultaneously. An unexpected tax complication, miscommunication with a property manager regarding the apartment, and an overdue investment document demanded swift attention, a demonstration that independence demanded not only emotional clarity but meticulous operational management, each small decision reinforcing accountability and consolidating confidence. Even casual dating presented layered challenges. The allure of spontaneity competed with the awareness of past patterns, requiring careful self-monitoring and reflection, moments to recognize when desire threatened equilibrium, and the discipline to redirect energy toward measured, intentional interaction rather than impulsive gratification. Yet the most profound test of autonomy occurred internally. Memories of shared routines, habits, and domestic compromises arose unpredictably, prompting flashes of doubt, nostalgia, and latent guilt. Moments when instinct tempted me to revert to pre-divorce behaviors, to seek validation or appeasement. But each time I paused, breathed, and reminded myself of lessons learned, the importance of boundaries, respect for self, and the inevitability of consequences, cultivating a resilience that made external disturbances feel less threatening and more instructive. By the end of this turbulent month, I understood that freedom was not a static state, but an ongoing negotiation between desire, discipline, and circumstance. That every external pressure or unforeseen challenge was an opportunity to refine autonomy, reaffirm clarity, and exercise psychological command. and that true liberation required not just the absence of control by others, but mastery over the self, deliberate engagement with life's complexities, and the quiet confidence that one could navigate uncertainty with composure, insight, and unshakable focus, emerging not merely unscathed, but stronger, wiser, and more attuned to the interplay of independence, responsibility, and consequence. As life continued outside the confines of marriage, the world felt simultaneously vast and intimate, a landscape where freedom intertwined with cautious curiosity, particularly when it came to the possibility of new relationships, each interaction a subtle test of emotional intelligence and self-restraint. Meeting Kelly from work introduced a different rhythm, a lightness and shared interest that was invigorating yet unfamiliar, reminding me that connection could exist without compromise of principles, but also that the heart, if left unchecked, could steer me into patterns I had long vowed to avoid, patterns of expectation, dependency, or misplaced trust. And so each conversation, each shared coffee, became a deliberate exercise in observation, moderation, and reflection. I found myself noticing small cues, the tone of her voice, the slight hesitation before answering personal questions, the unspoken communication in gestures and expressions, and I realized that after months of emotional recalibration, I could discern intention and compatibility with clarity, something I hadn't possessed when complacency had masked subtleties in my marriage. Social interactions outside work also carried their lessons. Casual friendships and acquaintances became mirrors reflecting past assumptions and habits, forcing me to reconsider what I valued, what I tolerated, and how I presented myself authentically while maintaining boundaries. There were moments of temptation, too, spontaneous invitations, playful flirtations, the lure of comfort in shared experiences, but each impulse was met with conscious evaluation. Did this align with my principles, or did it risk sliding into the complacency I had worked so hard to escape? Emotional vulnerability became a careful negotiation, revealing feelings without surrendering autonomy, offering presence without dependence, an ongoing calibration between openness and self-protection, between desire for companionship and recognition of past missteps. Occasionally, old patterns resurfaced, fleeting memories of Claire, her laughter, or the chaotic unpredictability of our dynamic tempted me to revisit what had been, to soften the resolve that had carried me through separation and mediation. But each time, I anchored myself in lessons learned, acknowledging the memory without allowing it to dictate behavior, preserving both perspective and momentum. I also began to confront the subtler dimensions of independence, practical choices around living space, social calendars, and financial responsibility required constant mindfulness, balancing personal desires with long-term goals, recognizing that autonomy was not simply being alone, but actively shaping the environment and relationships that defined life post-divorce. By the end of this period, a pattern emerged. Relationships could flourish under conditions of honesty, mutual respect, and measured engagement. Boundaries were not limitations, but protective frameworks that allowed authenticity to thrive. And emotional growth was not linear, but iterative, built on conscious choices, repeated reflection, and awareness of the past as a teacher rather than a tether. Each connection, each moment of testing, reinforced a principle that had been hard-earned through legal strategy, personal upheaval, and careful self-monitoring. Freedom was most valuable when paired with integrity, clarity, and resilience, and the heart, when guided by insight and deliberate intention, could navigate desire, attachment, and risk without compromise, ensuring that every choice strengthened rather than undermined the foundation I had painstakingly rebuilt. Just when life seemed to settle into a rhythm of autonomy and quiet confidence, the unexpected arrived in the form of challenges that tested both my emotional resilience and the structural boundaries I had painstakingly built. An anonymous message, terse and loaded with insinuation, appeared on my phone one morning, a reminder that past entanglements don't always remain dormant and that even measured choices can ripple into unforeseen consequences, requiring vigilance and swift appraisal. And so I paused, reading the lines over and over, noting the timing, the phrasing, the subtle threats implied, and immediately cataloged everything digitally, creating backups, timestamps, and cross-referencing prior interactions to understand intent. The same methodical approach that had carried me through Claire's abandonment now applied in a broader, more uncertain battlefield of personal accountability and reputation management. Soon, professional obligations intersected with personal matters. A major project at work demanded my full attention, deadlines compressing like a vice, team dynamics shifting unpredictably. And yet every interaction with colleagues, every email, every client call became a careful calibration, balancing assertiveness with diplomacy, clarity with patience, to ensure that external pressures did not compromise my judgment or expose vulnerabilities that could be exploited by those with ulterior motives. Amid these pressures, emotional temptations surfaced in subtle ways. A casual remark from Kelly, a shared laugh over coffee, a lingering glance that tested my ability to maintain detachment without coldness, engagement without dependency, reminding me that self-control in isolation is different from self-control in a dynamic social environment, and that the lessons of independence are constantly reinforced through real-time decision-making. Small victories compounded, each demonstrating that strategy applied consistently, whether in legal battles, personal interactions, or professional responsibilities, yielded tangible results. Emails were answered with precision, projects advanced ahead of schedule, and potential conflicts were neutralized before they escalated. Yet the psychological strain of balancing vigilance, emotional restraint, and strategic foresight was tangible. I felt it in the quiet moments, sitting at my desk late at night, reviewing documentation, reflecting on potential outcomes, and weighing the human consequences of each calculated choice, knowing that the integrity of my boundaries and the clarity of my intentions were constantly under subtle, invisible threat. The culmination of these trials arrived in a single moment of reckoning. A miscommunication escalated into confrontation. A colleague misunderstood an instruction. Tensions flared. And I realized that leadership, whether over projects, relationships, or personal destiny, was tested not only in triumph, but in handling small crises before they snowballed, in maintaining composure under scrutiny, and in converting reactive energy into deliberate action. By the end of this period, the lesson crystallized clearly. Independence and emotional resilience are inseparable from strategic awareness, and each challenge, no matter how minor or unexpected, is an opportunity to reinforce the principles of autonomy, clarity, and measured influence. Every choice, every response, every subtle observation shapes not only immediate outcomes, but the trajectory of future decisions. And the peace I had achieved was not the absence of friction, but mastery over how I engaged with it, transforming potential disruption into confirmation of both my agency and the disciplined mindset that had carried me through betrayal, legal maneuvering, and personal upheaval, ensuring that even when the world shifted unexpectedly, I remained firmly in command of my life, my relationships, and my future. The morning of the final hearing arrived with an almost ceremonial stillness, the courthouse corridors echoing faintly with footsteps, the air heavy with anticipation. Yet I felt an uncharacteristic calm, a clarity born from months of preparation and unwavering adherence to principle. Claire entered the room with Morrison at her side, her eyes avoiding mine, posture stiff but deliberate, and I noticed the subtle tremor in her hands as she clutched her folder, a tangible sign of tension that contrasted sharply with my steady composure. Each breath measured, each movement intentional, a testament to the patience, observation, and strategic foresight that had carried me to this moment. Judge Patterson presided with quiet authority, her gaze flicking between us as procedural formalities were observed, and when the question of reconciliation arose, I answered firmly, without hesitation, that my trust had been irrevocably broken, that the choices she made demonstrated her unwillingness to respect the commitments we had shared, and that this was not a matter of punishment, but of consequences, of recognizing that actions, throwing a wedding ring, declaring herself single, sending photographs, have measurable impact on shared lives. Claire's protests were soft but persistent, words entangled with regret, pleas for understanding, and promises of future fidelity, yet each claim collided with the immutable facts I had documented: timestamps, photographs, call logs, attorney correspondence, every piece catalogued with precision, leaving no room for ambiguity, no pathway for revision, no space for emotional reinterpretation to undermine the logical reality of her abandonment. The judge, after reviewing evidence and testimony, pronounced the dissolution of marriage final and irrevocable, division of property executed according to our meticulously prepared agreements, no spousal maintenance awarded, legal closure established, and I felt a subtle, profound shift, not triumph, not vengeance, but an expected serenity, the weight of unresolved tension lifted by clarity, fairness, and adherence to principle. A quiet acknowledgement that the conclusion was not merely legal, but psychological, affirming my autonomy, protecting my interests, and honoring the integrity of my boundaries. Outside the courtroom, Claire departed immediately, silent except for a fleeting glance that carried a mixture of sorrow, frustration, and reluctant acceptance, while I remained, breathing in the crisp air, feeling the residual tension dissolve into a calm focus that had been absent for months. The apartment, once a battlefield of emotional upheaval, now felt spacious, navigable, a sanctuary for reflection and deliberate choice. The echoes of chaos replaced with the quiet affirmation of self-determination. Weeks passed, and daily routines resumed with a new rhythm, one defined not by negotiation or reaction, but by conscious engagement with life on my terms. Work, travel, personal projects, friendships, and measured social connections unfolded without manipulation or coercion, a life rebuilt on the lessons of accountability, foresight, and self-respect. Encounters with the past, texts, messages, or chance meetings with friends of Claire elicited no emotional turbulence, only clarity and acceptance. I had learned that closure is not granted by apology, by regret, or by reconciliation, but by steadfast adherence to principle, by defining the boundaries of what is acceptable, and by acting in alignment with those boundaries regardless of external pressure. By the time winter turned toward spring, I recognized the depth of what had been achieved, a reclamation of agency, a psychological resolution that did not depend on her acknowledgement, and a profound understanding that respect, both for oneself and for commitments, cannot be conditional, cannot be compromised without consequence, and that the path forward, though marked by absence and loss, is illuminated by the discipline, clarity, and integrity that emerged from the storm. I stepped into this new life fully aware, fully present, unburdened by past missteps, carrying only the lessons learned, and in that awareness I found not bitterness, but freedom, not triumph over another, but mastery over myself, the ultimate reckoning complete, the final chapter written, and the future firmly within my command.